a comprehensive video for this past week. So starting pretty much on the 3rd, we'll go into YouTube first, we'll go into all of this stuff first, the history, and then we will go into the ChatGPT over here. So as far as history, and we're only going to give the highlights, so something that we haven't found in other videos, in other resources, kind of the, oh man, that's awesome moments. These are all root vegetables that Dr. Gundry has on his yes list. There's resistant starch. I will say keto, so high fat, moderate protein, low carb. So avoiding a lot of these is doing wonders. I'm on day 3, so stopped researching that. We did a look back on what is it, more carbs or more fat during a lifespan that gives you the largest health span. And it seems like if you don't get sick, most cultures use a lot like high carb, like Okinawa, 85% purple sweet potatoes. However, if you do, and for regulation and what the of physiological processes, usually keto is going to give you that boost. There are no cultures that really do full keto that have been established. The Kitavans are one of the cultures that do 60% coconut, so anywhere from 40% to 60% coconut calories, and the rest of their calories come from carbs and some protein and fish. They've lived adequately, and if the lifespan's corrected for mortality in infants, you could see a higher jump, probably in the 80s or 90s. What we know now from keto and people being in keto, it seems like keto, especially the plant-based, plant paradox keto, is probably going to be superior for longevity than these high-carb traditional cultures. Time will tell. These are some ways in a Crohn's review that significantly reduced Crohn's relapse and or symptoms. So moxibustion, there was wormwood, which interesting, wormwood and moxibustion used both Artemisia family of herbs. There is aloe vera. If you soak the plant in water to extract the gel, so sideways, and then eat that gel, it creates a lining. But the two best are definitely those. Most of the products that are aloe vera gel, they're actually not just the gel for preservation shelf life purposes. So you would have to buy the plant and prepare it. Yeah. Neem is apparently toxic to the liver if prolonged use, and for both neem and wormwood they recommend 1 week on, 2 weeks off. We'll see that in ChatGPT. A lot of the exercises, like a external rotation, can all be done at an angle. So if you lift your elbow up this way, you can always do them at an angle to get greater range of motion. The stores that were listed out of all of these that actually have ferments are Walmart, which is usually in bulk, or Sprouts, which actually has a complete different fermented foods profile than Whole Foods. There is overlap, but sometimes Sprouts has things that Whole Foods doesn't. It's not only the Sprouts brand. This is usually what I eat. If you can see the history, some of the search terms at Whole Foods and the resulting organic greens, produce is what I get, as well as some probiotic. And this inner eco, apparently people swear by it. It's water kefir. It's the only water kefir besides fermenteria, and we'll touch on that. That I know of. You can buy commercially, that's very high quality. Wild brine, recently I have not had very good luck. The batches have come to where they smell good, but if you eat them, they disrupt your gut. They leave you with the cramps, the pains. In 2024 to 2025, we purchased probably a dozen, so 12. After that, 2 bad batches, we stopped. The reviews don't reflect this, so I wanted to bring it to everyone's attention. So this is critical. Part of Dr. Gundry's approach is low carbs. This is Dave. Dave Hales, he has Crohn's, and his wife, Jan, has rheumatoid arthritis, but they both are pretty much asymptomatic and living a regular life due to the Dr. Gundry's plant paradox. They both inherently, just from plant paradox, are already getting very low carbs, and then there's also a ketogenic version which is even lower carbs, and that seems to be the best across autoimmune diseases. We talked about that in another chat, how it lowers inflammation throughout. So it's not only intermittent fasting, squeezing that window, it's what you do in that window and what you eat. And if you start the meal, there's Glucose Goddess, and she says start meals with veggies, so mainly organic greens cooked, and cooked to a mush. If you have Crohn's, most can tolerate cooked to a mush, and then afterwards you load up in terms of healthy fats like avocado, olives. I actually do not suggest olive oil. It seems to disrupt the gut. Olives do not, especially olives in vinegar, because olives are sometimes in citric acid, which is synthesized, but olives in vinegar is usually from wine natural fermentation. And then follow that by kind of a mix. So flaxseed would be a mix of fiber, some carbs, and fats and protein, and then end with maybe a carb dessert. No need to end with carbs. Okay. If you're looking to get extremely low carbs, the greens will do it for you. But if you want a carb dessert, something like beans, which at the end of a very high keto natural meal, beans are very carb high, and or sweet potato, they actually are like candy for those who eat whole raw foods. So nuts and seeds, especially soaked and pressure cooked, most people with Crohn's, diverticulitis, colitis, they can do well if you start small and you work up. And now the recommendation is to have high fiber, and what you do if you follow that eating order, actually buffer things to when you have these seeds or nuts towards the end, middle end, the fiber from the vegetables at the beginning, as well as some ferments interspersed throughout, kind of clean away and actually remove nuts and seeds from pockets. Most of the time, it's about keeping things going and not getting things stuck. And that's what that plant paradox ketogenic version gives you. Nuts and seeds actually add to the movement rather than slow things down. Most of the longevity experts, we touched on this, they actually follow a ketogenic diet with a very compressed eating window. And you'll see a lot of these videos is because sugar in the body is poison over a certain amount. And Dr. Gary Fetkin, and this presentation specifically is one of the highest quality scientific presentations, in my opinion, of everything I've ever watched on YouTube. And he explains why anything greater than 4 grams, the body actually has to detox. And the key takeaway from this is most of the body, to function at optimal levels, actually deals with carb at very, very low amounts, usually derived from fat or proteins. And that's what is wanted by the body, fat and proteins. Here's a Sprouts and Walmart lookups. So I go on and search the terms in that Health Dragon spreadsheet shared with everybody for those fermented foods and see what we find. And there we note which brands and typically at what place. To ChatGPT here, all of these will be copy and pasted into this What I Learned document. Usually, if you see an image that does not include organic here, there either is an organic counterpart or there isn't yet. If it doesn't say wild or organic, that means it's best to wait. Here are all of Gundry's approved resistant starches, and here's actually how many calories per, in case you need to get to a certain calorie count and you want to reduce the carbohydrate load, or you want to ingest resistant starches with low carbs and you can supplement with fats or protein. how to prepare tiger nuts as well as pretty much all nuts and seeds, although these are more tubers. You want to soak and then pressure cook or pressure steam them. On this, looking for fermentation, there is an audiobook. It's by Sandra Katz. I believe it's called The Art of Fermentation. It's extremely good. Currently on Spotify, it has 5 stars. And I've been listening to probably 2 or 3 hours of it, and it's very high quality. Here what we do is we take a product, for instance, from Walmart or other grocers, and we take a screenshot, put it into ChatGPT, and have ChatGPT look for external sites to review. And only the products that get high reviews, either from that site or external sites, are usually put on the list. So it's usually 4.5 or higher. Sometimes it can be a high 3, a low 4, but never below that, because that indicates quality concerns. Cleveland Kraut actually has a variety, I think, of 7 different sauerkrauts on their site that you can order shipped to, or you can look at, for instance, Sprouts and Whole Foods, and they'll generally pack a little different of the variety, and they're one of the best. Most sites consider them the best package you can buy at a store. Salt and kelp are unlikely to aggravate myocarditis unless overdone. And the one pain felt in the heart that one day, the amount of salt and the amount of kelp ingested kept constant after that, and it's very minimal kelp, probably 1/32 of a teaspoon, or even less every meal. And then for salt, we're at least at 2,000 to 3,000 milligrams per day, and we have not had that same pain. Quick note for cocoa, there have been people with gluten cross-contamination for corn, which is the substrate cocoa grows probiotics on. So it might not be for those with autoimmune diseases, as corn and gluten are both triggers. Again, this is the magical coconut water kefir that people swear by. It's at Whole Foods. I've tried it and it is extremely good for gut health. So metabolic syndrome can either be caused by low sleep, and the result can be long sleep. Usually, when it's resulting long sleep, it's because sleep disruptions, and you cannot generate that much restorative energy and repair the mitochondria because the mitochondria themselves are damaged. How you solve that is usually low carb. And the individuals who still ate starch, they went from a typical standard American diet, which probably the carbs were over 500, 600 grams, and a lot of synthetic carbs and additives, into a whole food, lower carb, so maybe 200 to 300 grams. If you're having issues at 200 to 300 grams eating naturally, the best is to go even lower to 20 to 50 grams. Is what they recommend. Anything below 30 grams is optimal for getting into ketosis in terms of carbs. And from Whole Foods. there are ways you can have perfectly good health markers and lab markers on most of, and we'll take a look at this, but insulin, APOA, APOB, but then have some worrying markers like glucose getting higher, maybe 99, and it's supposed to be below 100. If you're feeling tired, if you're feeling fatigued, if you're feeling chronic inflammation, there is a cycle that can be broken with ketosis. Even though some of the labs may appear normal, there may be a gut, and we'll get into this, a gut inflammatory reaction to carbs. And it can be noted as carb intolerance. It's what most people note it. And it's actually quite common that skinny individuals, like myself especially, if you are eating 600 to 700 grams of carbs in forms of beans to be efficient, however, that over time can impair your carb metabolism and your mitochondria. And even then, lowering it down to 200, 300 grams can still have a stress. When you lower it down to something like 20, 30 grams, your opportunity to recover is extremely high. This is what the Crohn's 100% remission semi-vegetarian diet ate. You can see it totaled at 263 grams. Most of them are extremely fibrous and are eaten with some sort of ferment, some sort of fat, and that blunts the effect of the carbs. And 263 grams of carbs, although it appears a lot, when you're with fiber, when you're with ferments, for most individuals, compared to Western diets, this will do wonders. Again, if this does not, then trying something similar, like a plant paradox ketogenic diet, and Terry Walls actually has a ketogenic version of her diet for MS, and those are, if you're really unhealthy, how to come back. And that's shown across autoimmune diseases, as we covered in another video, that it helps. Jen on Dave Hall's channel was talking about how she felt great on day 33. She cheated. This is what she ate, probably because the net carbs and especially the sugars are extremely high, as well as wheat is a trigger, and vanilla. Chromium helps to blunt the effects of carbs. And it seems like the natural animal-based alternate are mushrooms, fungi, yeast. One note that Dr. Gary Fetke made is, yes, bean starch is 100% glucose polymers, but 100% glucose, 30% of that gets converted into fructose. And fructose is 7 to 10 times more likely to cause oxidative damage in your system. One thing to touch on here is metabolic syndrome. The way to beat it, as we talked about, you squeeze the eating window, you reduce the carb load. After every meal, exercise for 15 minutes, and it can be gentle movements, kind of like an air wobble, even back and forth. Anything that gets you moving, even gently, for 15 minutes, and then afterwards you go into sharp parasympathetic mode by some deep breathing. And what I do is I focus on progressive muscle relaxation. So instead of tensing up, I relax. And I focus on that as my meditative point. And what that helps is you relax more and more and more. It's like a spectrum. And you also meditate better and better and better. So you go deeper into meditation, and you get the benefits right after exercise of going into that extreme parasympathetic mode. And so something like a 5 to 6 hour eating window with 3 meals in, low carbs, so following glucose goddess, you're going to have your veggies, fats, protein, then carb, in that order. After each meal, you do that 10 to 15 exercise minutes, and then parasympathetic meditation induction. And that is the quickest way to get into ketosis. And interestingly, the same top tips for beating metabolic syndrome, which is why most of the YouTube videos seen on the history, when they talk about beating metabolic syndrome, they essentially went low carb. That's what Dr. Gary Fetke lists in his, and usually that's after 3 months, you should see drastic improvements in most of these symptoms resolved. If you look at the numbers from Dr. Gary Fetke's presentation. Most of the reduction waistline, so if you feel like you're more snug in a very good way, it's visceral fat leaving. There is some water, there is some inflammation in terms of the gut, but usually it's visceral fat and then subcutaneous abdominal fat. Can make up close to 100% if you're not having, and you probably are having some sort of inflammation. On top of moving after a meal, those who do not react to ginger with autoimmunity, which is a high cross reactivity, can take ginger with warm ginger tea is best, and that will get motility going as well as that exercise. If not, warm water will do. What I do for exercise, I do small bouts of 3 to 5 minutes, even less. Sometimes it's just a minute, but moving and not staying still. And doing that several times after a meal. So it might be in the span of 30 minutes. I do 1 minute, then 2 minutes, then 1 minute, then I remember again and do 2 minutes. It's any time I feel like I'm stagnant. Here is what our ancestors ate. It's important to know that what they were probably doing is leaves were everywhere. They ate them. When they found tubers, they picked them from the ground and ate them. These were harder to come by, seeds, nuts, and grasses. This gave them the protein they needed when they did not get something even much rarer, which is game. And then wild fruit we know is seasonal, so it was only typically in the summer, approaching fall. So mostly they subsided with these 3, which matches perfectly with Glucose Goddess's suggestion of how to eat. Mostly leaves, seeds, nuts in the middle, and then potentially you can finish with carbs, and that gives you the best to reproduce at our evolutionary biology benefits. And this is to reduce triggers. We talked about starting low and slow. And then soaking plus pressure steaming is way better than raw blend. it, because if you blend, you don't actually resolve the lectins issue, but when you soak and pressure steam, you do. This is what I typically eat in a day. Here's some of the calories. And the net carbs is what's important. And here you can see almost all the net carbs come from this cooked beans, which we're currently trying to replace with hemp seeds so we can tolerate them. And that will also bring up the calorie count to something anabolic, which will be good for building muscle. Most of the vegetables on Dr. Gundry's yes-no list, which again is on the Dragon spreadsheet, are extremely low net carbs. Some of the tubers he has, and he says to limit them, will be more. So you can see here, purple sweet potato is close to 20 grams, whereas radishes, most of them are net carbs 1.8 grams. Here's broccoli at 3 to 4 grams. Carrots is actually higher, and parsnips is actually treated as kind of that resistant starch, approaching 12 to 13. If you eat leafy greens, you're automatically getting, especially cooked leafy greens, and at least 2 to 4 cups, your calcium requirement is halfway met. And depending on how you eat, for instance, the plant paradox ketogenic way, you probably will not need that much more calcium. And calcium absorption is highest when there's a low amount each meal rather than a high spike one meal. So you want to spread it out, and you will actually reach very close to this 1,000 milligram a day with just greens and flax seed or some other type of seeds. Like basil seeds are an excellent source if cooked, if you have digestive issues. Again, here's an extremely low net carbs. And another quick thing we do is we take the entire list of everything. For instance, we'll search in Walmart sauerkraut, and this is everything that came back in Walmart. We copy that and we actually merge it with everything that came back in Sprouts, and we put it here and say, hey, of the above which are raw fermented, and you can see what is actually raw fermented, and then we narrow down the list to what makes practical sense. As Schwartz, for instance, yes, it's never fermented, but they sell in bulk. It's $150 for a pail, and it hasn't been reviewed, so that leaves these two which are on the list. And we do that for every type of ferment on the list. So here's apple cider vinegar, and this way AI gets us the answer. For instance, you have White House Organic raw, unfiltered, and it actually is raw. There's also fresh press, and both of those ended up on the list in some order. I will say, to echo Naomi Whittle, for keto what's really helped is this, getting a lot of sodium and a lot of water. So I have a salt lick. I put pink Himalayan salt in a small glass container and I just lick it, usually after I drink water 2 or 3 times. And I try to savor the water, savor the salt, as well as eating enough, which is one thing she mentioned, and that will get you the other electrolytes. That has helped a lot in keto induction, at least for me, more than just moderating the fats. This is what help the most. Also, there is a microbiome adjustment which can cause nausea. So if you are feeling uneasy, nausea, extreme tiredness, could be the microbiome resetting itself, especially if you have an overgrowth of candida or something similar. Especially fungi, they like sugars. Keto takes away those sugars. They don't have a fuel source. They will fight, and eventually your immune system also kicks in, because in ketosis, as Dr. Gary Fettke alludes to, you have greater immune system activation. And that's why I actually felt an EBV kind of tickle cough, resulting in 5 coughs in my throat, when around the time of wake up. This is what we were talking about. Even though your labs might result normal, you still can have issues post-carb intake, especially high carb, due to carb intolerance, which can actually be just inflammation in your genetics that dispose you, along with epigenetics, that you've exposed yourself to a lot of carbs. You will overreact to them after every meal. Here's what we alluded to as sugar is, if you look at it from a longevity standpoint, especially if you have autoimmune diseases, how it is poisonous to you. You can see it cuts your immune system, but then you have higher oxidative stress, which leads to even getting sicker if you have an external pathogen. And in most of these, when sugar is cut, especially sugar that's not tied to fiber, seems to be the key, because fiber pads sugar, as Glucose Goddess alludes to, as well as individuals who do a live blood spike test. It seems to fiber and fat, and when you have both of them, for instance, in nuts and seeds, it really reduces the intake of carbs into your system. And here you can see what happens when there is more intake. You have higher risk across the board for autoimmune diseases. As well as just general health conditions. And this is what we alluded to, but therapeutically, staying on a fat diet. And you can cycle, but there are mixed reviews. So if you're having seizures, you're having autoimmune issues, and you cycle, breaking that cycle could cause you a relapse, and that relapse could put you in a potential state of being very difficult to recover. And so, although keto cycling is advised for some individuals, they've done okay by staying on keto for several years, like Mary Whittle. Soy is completely excluded. Dr. Walls and Dr. Gundry both agree if you have MS, you exclude soy, even fermented products. If you're buying coconut oil, the best is anything that is organic, extra virgin, cold pressed, because that will ensure high lauric acid, usually peroxide values, and that happens to be Nutiva and this Garden of Life. This is what I used to eat when I got super sick. So you can see some of these meals are completely against Gundry's protocol. However, I wanted to check the net carbs, and the net carbs from all these meals, if you look, is about 82 grams. So the contents of the meals containing lectins was the issue. And usually, from my experience, ferments are the most important part, because there's individuals that are very sick from Crohn's that get progressing completely asymptomatic with drinking something like milk kefir, which would be against Gundry's list. But again, the ferments are the best because they reset your microbiome, they reset the immune response. Then comes Gundry's list, especially the lectin-free foods, because lectins trigger the immune response. So if you introduce things that are taking away that immune response, and then you're taking away the things that introduce the immune response, you're almost there. The last thing is low carbs, and that's probably in third place, because if you're really sick, you can have 1, 2, but if you have high carbs, that itself is an immune trigger. So it almost is like on Gundry's no list is high carbs. But that's 1, 2, 3 on what I would introduce to resolve all autoimmune diseases. And this is what you can expect after 3 months of following just a very low carbohydrate ketogenic diet. You can see here, all of these, HDL is actually anti-inflammatory, so that's good. And then all of these are extremely good in what you want to see. Look at these drops. I mean, you're getting negative 60% on your glucose over months at a time. And your insulin basal rate is negative 50%. So these are extreme numbers, and that's probably why it has such a potent effect on all your health parameters in the best ways. Also, if you're going low carb, it's good to check the net carbs. For instance, of millet is extremely high. And what I do is I use ACV or something else to kind of season the millet, and that way it extends the life of the millet in the fridge, so I'm not cycling it back and forth from freezer to fridge. And the ACV will keep it fresh for 4 or 5 days at least. And I can enjoy less carbs throughout 5 days because it's still fresh, given the acidity, so the pH drop of ACV. If you go from having 0 dreams and sleeping 13 plus hours to having a lot of vivid dreams and sleeping 10.5 hours, that means you're actually getting less sleep, more repair in less time. And that's also evidenced by a deeper sleep. Here you can see the increased REM density. And there are some individuals with genetic adaptations that can sleep 4 to 6 hours and they feel completely refreshed with only 4 to 6 hours. And they do have consistent, as in one of these chats before I started the videos, they have reduced inflammatory markers compared to controls that sleep 7 to 9 hours throughout. So it has something to do with they can get deeper sleep, they compress the sleep, almost like compressing the eating window. They can sleep faster and better with less inflammation. And then one thing I've noticed from the keto as I'm on day 3 is compared to how I was in the morning, with extremely low bloating and all the gas and pain. You do have this vagus nerve trigger that happens around 45 minutes after, which ties into the Okinawan and just in general the Japanese cultural phenomena of, I think, 96%, based on another video, drink warm water around 2 cups in the morning, and then they wait 45 minutes, probably because they end up going to the restroom, defecate, and then after that they're ready to eat, because you get this vagus trigger where everything's clearing, and then you start to salivate and get very hungry. And that's exactly what I've experienced, and apparently ketosis makes that happen more. And it actually is a very good feeling, especially afterwards. Not so much during, but this apparently resolves when the gut inflammation resolves. You'll still have the clearing behavior without feeling bad, and then you'll feel really good. This is the Ketopan diet we were looking at, and some estimates are that they had higher fat, especially from coconuts. So I do want to show the disparities here. And most of their deaths were they got something and they died immediately afterwards, within a week or 2, rather than being chronically ill. Which most people who are chronically ill say, I would rather the former rather than the latter. So that's usually how they die, rather than being chronically. And the best way to break ketosis is you keep the same meal structure, you just increase the carbs to about 50 to 150 grams, usually in 24 hours, mostly at dinner, every 14 days. It can be as early as 5 days if you want to be more anabolic. Towards the tail end is every 14 days if you want to be less anabolic and more symptom controlling. And some don't ever break it, which is not advised, but if it works well for them at keeping symptoms down, and symptoms down means longer health, which does agree. Some relapses can be brutal. So the former is advised based on the medical literature. The latter is anecdotally advised, especially if the relapse is severe. One thing, if you are exercising, you breathe in and you actually take in 3,000% of air in a high cardiovascular workout than if you're sleeping, for instance. If you do this next to cans of paint, you actually only have to be around 15 minutes to receive a chronic hazardous dose. So if you keep doing 15-minute exercises without proper ventilation, for instance, you have paint and you're working out in the attic, this is a health concern because of how much air you're actually inhaling. Way worse is if you are next to an oven clean cycle, as that can actually kill birds based on the PTFEs released, and that can damage you even in 2 hours. It exceeds OSHA's limits. So you want windows open during the day when the HVAC is highest, and with any exhaust fan on when you're doing an oven clean cycle, if you do it, because a lot of the times cleaning the oven has a lot less benefits than the health costs you are paying. especially in newer houses with higher insulation. And for most of these, if you have a Crohn flare or you have a this, I believe it's hyperemesis gravidarum, which means it's genetically and hormonal triggered in pregnancy, whereas Crohn's is more inflammatory, and there's some genetics and something you eat that triggers it. There's probably a lot of overlap in the inflammation and the vagus nerve dysfunction, because most of the recommendations are pretty much to reset the vagus nerve as best as possible, which are really a lot of these two, and then start eating, which really just addresses the symptoms are kind of staying steady. Really how you prevent it is you want to reset that vagus nerve as fast as possible to down inflammation. Lastly, a few additions to this list are seen here, and there's some notes that relate to the one on the left. And then this has been updated, as well as the Gundry list as spoken of here. I hope this helps you out a lot.